What's up, Informed Mystics? Welcome back to the High Priestess and the Hierophant YouTube channel. I'm Erika, and my co-host is...
Drew. Hi.
Hi. Welcome to our first content video. We did an introduction video, and we're going to discuss what mysticism is, what a mystical experience is, and why they're significant experiences.
Yeah, I think it's nice just to get that baseline because this is sort of the filter that we personally will be examining most of the topics, if not all of the topics really, that we talk about on this channel.
Exactly.
So I know we both looked, and I'm just going to quickly read the definition that I found for mysticism and then let you go ahead and And I'm kind of paraphrasing because they also had deity in here, but I just left that part out. I said a belief that union with spiritual appreciation of knowledge inaccessible to the intellect may be attained through contemplation and self-surrender. And the basic gist of it is this idea that you can become one with God. You can have union with whatever that is, right?
Right, and it's so funny because I read a bunch of definitions, and the one I picked is exactly word for word. I must have written it from the same site, so I'm not going to repeat it because it's literally verbatim what you wrote.
Well, you either had that or you had something really awful. They're just basically you're crazy or you're a liar. That's what the other,
Yeah, it was kind of insulting and offensive, so I was like, thanks. This was the only one that I felt actually resonated, was meaningful, described mysticism in a sense, in a way that would be functional for us to use as a lens to look at.
And it's certainly what I have in my mind when I talk about mysticism. So,
yeah, me too. I was just going to say, I really like the idea of having access to wisdom or knowledge that is otherwise inaccessible through the intellect. I thought that was a really important part of it. Whatever, like you said, it doesn't have to be deity. It could be whatever, non-human spiritual being or energy or whatever you associate with or whatever presents itself to you. But the point being that it's giving you wisdom and knowledge and information that would otherwise be inaccessible to you through your human...
Right. You can't think your way into it. You can think through it, but you can't think your way into it. It just happens.
Yeah, that's well said. That's well said.
Every culture if not every, close to every culture and every religious practice throughout history has had some form of mysticism tied into. So I think that's also a key important part of the definition. Right. Or it's a partner to the definition, maybe.
Interestingly enough, I think even in more kind of secular circles, you find references to it using different language or different descriptive words. Even Einstein credited intuition as being the main kind of driving force of his findings, which was really, there's a quote somewhere, which is really interesting because I think it goes beyond spiritual traditions or religions. I think most people have mystical experiences. They might approach it in a different way. They might call it something different, gut feeling, or paranormal experience or something, but it still falls in that category in my mind.
I couldn't help it. The informed part of me was what actually happens in the brain? So I had to look. And so the frontal and the temporal lobes are what, if you put somebody in a CAT scan and you look at their brain at what's happening when they have a mystical experience. And I found that interesting. The frontal lobe controls language and voluntary movement and also higher executive function. And the temporal lobe controls processing of auditory info and memory. So these are the two places in your brains in our brain that are lighting up and that are active during these experiences. I thought that was interesting. We don't need to go too deep into that, but I just always like that little science piece in there. I can't help it.
That is really interesting. And that's interesting because I would have thought that your whole brain would kind of be involved, but I don't really know a lot about neurology and how brains work.
I don't think there are many things that happen in our brain that it's always just pieces here and there,
Right,
even if they're
right.
big pieces. Like I don't know if there's anything that your whole brain participates in.
It
Might
feels
be,
like
I don't
it
know.
when it's happening. Feels like it. It's like, whoa. It's a roller coaster for every, a part of your brain, in my opinion. But yeah, I get it. Yeah.
So the next piece was, what is a mystical experience? And I didn't really I just put it in my own words, but go ahead, tell me what you came up with.
Okay, and some of the words that I found were interesting, so I'd have to define one or two of them. So I looked at, I found an article or a blog that talked about the characteristics that make up the mystical experience. And the first one was ineffability, which is the idea that whatever you experience defies expression, that it's difficult, or you feel like it's almost impossible to report the context of that experience, or the content, I should say, of that experience, because it kind of goes beyond words. Like, you find yourself struggling to put words to the experience.
Do you find that's true of your mystical experiences?
Sometimes, yes. I don't think that's always the case. I think there are aspects of it that are hard to put into words, but there are, depending on the experience. And there's one that we'll discuss, and maybe this is something we'll discuss on the Patreon channel, that I had, and I mentioned to you briefly, where there were elements of that experience that were really hard to put into words. They defied words, but not always the case. Like, that's why I like the idea of it being hard to fully explain the experience. Not hard to explain, but fully explain.
Yeah, because for me, I think I can usually put them into words, but it's hard to why this happened, or how this happened, or what it what that is. Like, that's the hard part for me, rather than I could tell you what happened, but I don't understand it at all. Like, or I don't understand what created it, or, you know what I mean?
Right. So, like, when I said context instead of content, I meant content, but maybe context was also right too. Like, it's hard to kind of I understand, like, what its significance is, or what its place is in terms of even your own spiritual practice, or just life in general. Yeah, I get that. Another characteristic was subjective, that the experience is interpreted through a religious framework, or spiritual beliefs, or ideological perspective. So it's subjective. It's not like an objective experience that, like they said, that you're looking at it from the point of view of a series of beliefs you already have, that it filters through that, which, I think that that's true, that in the case of kind of getting an understanding of its significance, you would have to have some subjective perspective on it. If you didn't have a belief system, that would help give it meaning, you were more likely to just write it off as like a weird experience, or, like a dream is just a dream kind of thing, It
could also be a catalyst to push you into some, tradition or whatnot, a belief system.
Yeah, for sure. I wrote myself that it could be either internal or external, that you can have an internal experience like active imagination, astral journeying, meditation, dreaming, or you can have an external experience where something happens in your external environment that feels synchronistic. So it's almost like, I said it could be either or, but it's almost like it has to be both together, like an internal and external experience together, but not always, because sometimes it can just be more internal. Does that make sense?
Well, I think what it is that it's always internal, but sometimes it's also external.
Right, yeah, exactly. There's components of both. And even when it's happening internally, one could argue that it's not all you, though. Like, it could be an internal conversation with a deity, but the deity isn't just an archetype within your mind. It's an actual being that exists in another realm.
Right. And regardless of whether it's all internal, it's still significant. It still has an importance whether you know it or acknowledge it, in my mind.
Right. Like, and today, for example, I was, sitting at my altar and I was meditating and listening for a message from the Morrigan. And whenever I hear crow 3 times in a row, I associate that with her. And this crow was going off and doing it. And as soon as it started crowing, I knew it was going to do it 3 times and stop. Sure enough, it did. So that was like the combination of the external mirror, like having some significance to the internal experience.
Yeah.
And I wrote, it can be induced or spontaneous. So you can actually, like, for example, when I set up my altar today with the intention to have an experience like that, but it can also happen when I'm, walking down the street or, making dinner or having a conversation with somebody. Yeah. Okay, so another characteristic was this is a new word for me, notic experience, Noetic, which is defined as intuitive. Notic is intuition, insight, psychic, or mystical awareness. I've never heard of that word before, but basically it's a psychic or intuitive or, insightful experience that involves like synchronicities and that kind of thing. So that word was an interesting word for me, and I would definitely agree with that these mystical experiences are psychic and intuitive in their nature. Any thoughts on that? I think you probably would agree with that.
What I wrote is a powerful experience out of quote unquote normal reality that leaves a lasting impression that is or becomes life altering in some significant way. And then typically has religious, spiritual, or moral connections and connotations or repercussions even. And obviously these could be ignored or misunderstood. But, I listed things like dreams, channeling, illnesses, trauma, visions, encounters, injuries. And I also said, they could be spontaneous or sought out.
Yeah. No, that's good. I think that aligns a lot with what I wrote down. I also wrote transients, like they're hard to pin down and they're unpredictable and they tend to, happen not quickly, but they're impermanent. It's not like you in this permanent mystical state for weeks and days. Right. I guess that can happen, but most of them are more like,
well, and I think it would be difficult to survive the everyday world if you were constantly in that state.
Right. Or
at least to function as a normal person.
On acid or something. Yeah. And then the article also said they're a passive kind of passivity. Involves the subject entering a passive yin-like state mentally, at least, so they're receptive. So either that's like you're hiking and you're just like focused on not breaking your ankle and falling down the side of a, mountain or something, or you're in meditation, but you're in a passive receptive state. And I wrote not necessarily physically because you could be, this could happen while you're physically moving. Like my husband rides a motorcycle and he says that gets him into that state because it's like you literally have to focus on driving. You can't be, thinking and planning because you can die if you make one wrong move. So those are the characteristics. And I did some listing too of examples like meditation, divination, ritual, walking, hard physical labor, dangerous activities, creative activities like dance and creating artwork, that kind of thing.
And we wanted to talk about why they are significant. I think that's kind of, that's like a complicated, like there could be a lot of answers to that question, but
yeah, I read a lot.
I basically just said that it's an opportunity for growth and personal development on all levels.
I think it can also validate certain beliefs that you already have. And in a way that's almost, it's interesting because the validation piece is an important part, especially when you think about informed mysticism. Like you have this belief, it's almost like a cycle. Like you have this belief system and then you have this experience that validates the belief system, but then you also will look to external sources like other people's traditions or belief systems to validate that experience. So it's almost like this loop that happens. But I think they can be validating. Like if you intellectually feel aligned with a certain, like for example, reincarnation as a concept, as an idea, appeals to you. And then you have a mystical experience, which one I will share on Patreon that we already spoke about. We did a video before about past lives. You have a mystical experience about a past life that is hugely validating. And then you come out of that being an even bigger believer in reincarnation, not just as an idea, but as something that you believe, not even believe, to be true based on that experience.
Definitely.
I said they can be important to people who don't have a strong belief system to help them develop one or shift their perspective of their reality.
Again, that it can be a catalyst to push you.
Like you said. And like you said, they can give you guidance and direction and purpose in your life. I think they're also important when it comes to one of the main critical pieces of spiritual practice, which is preparation for death and growing older and detaching from this, not being so attached to the permanence of this reality of your body and of this world of your physical existence of other people. Like, I think that that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. Some mystical experiences can be like touching death, so...
Which helps remove the fear, because if the biggest fear of death is the fear of the unknown, which is probably the biggest fear that humans have, I think. Like, a lot of fears we have, if you peel back the onion, the core of it is fear of the unknown. And mystical experiences take some of that away because it gives us a peek behind the curtain of the unknown, I think.
Well, I was just going to say, it will definitely shift your perception of reality, of life, of your life. And change how you look at the world and how you live. Sure.
Yeah, there has to be a certain level of faith involved too, and belief involved too in that, I think. But if you combined faith and belief with mystical experience, it's a powerful tool to shape your understanding of your existence, your purpose, this life. And I think that's why historically, those who sought mystical experiences were highly discouraged, to put it lightly, like burnt at the stake, because that's a powerful thing when you combine all of that together.
Absolutely, yeah.
It gives you a level of agency and, authority over your own existence that you wouldn't otherwise have. And I wrote it helps with authenticity and knowledge of your true self. It helps with, like, psychological development.
Yeah. Again, it is just this open invitation to delve deeper into the self and to grow and to become more authentic and the whole nine. And I feel like, I don't feel like you have to have mystical experiences, right? But I do feel like, from my own personal perspective, that in order to, that most people have them, whether they realize it or not, on some level.
Yeah, I agree.
And that in order to really dig deep into a spiritual practice, that the kind that we're talking about, where it's about the psycho-spiritual stuff, shadow work, that kind of stuff, that these kinds of experiences can be validating, as you said, but they're sort of integral. What's the word I'm looking for? They are at the center, and they're very important to these paths. And again, it doesn't have to be some big grand, like, oh my God, like it would blow everybody's socks off. Right. They can be very small and easily ignored things, but they're still right. Yeah. But there's still a conversation with deity happening, basically. And this is the kind of thing we're talking about.
So I completely agree with all that. And I do believe, although you can't stay in kind of like an ecstatic state of mystical, enlightenment and dance in the, soup of the universe constantly, that I do believe that this entire lifetime is a conversation with the divine. And I think the most important thing we can do is pay attention. I was watching, there's a documentary on tarot called Tarology. Enrique Enriquez, who's a famous he's an artist, and he's like a conceptual artistic tarot reader, has this very unique approach to the tarot. And they ask people, all these different tarot experts, at the end of that video, or at the end of the movie, what is, they asked them to describe, if they could, simply, what is reading tarot, and they said it's paying attention. A bunch of them said that. And I would argue that if you pay attention, that we can have mystical experiences all the time, that we are having them. We just need to pay attention to them. Maybe even our whole life is that, but we just need to pay attention.
And what a beautiful way to look at life, especially as chaotic and harsh as it can be, if you look at it like a conversation with divinity.
Yeah, I think it is. The one other thing I made some notes on, which I think we were going to talk about, is talking about the informed piece, like what is informed mysticism?
Well, so we already talked about what is informed mysticism, but I thought we could talk about why it's important, what the significance of that is.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Yeah, I the first thing I put down was validation. Obviously, it always is helpful to seek validation from the outside, to some extent, right? That it can be very empowering to get I know what you're talking about. Like, I get that. Like, it can be great for your mental health and your well-being, because I know that there was a time on my path where I was like, okay, I need to seek professional help. And like, something is wrong with me. And then slowly through outside validation, I realized, oh no, I'm okay. This is okay. This is actually normal. It's just not everybody's normal. It can help build your confidence. The informed piece can help build your confidence in what it is you're doing and what you're trying to do and what you're accomplishing, want to accomplish. It can give you an opportunity to build community, obviously, to find like-minded people. And it's an opportunity for further development, because I have always found, I call it like following the breadcrumbs, that there'll be this little piece that I might run across that I'm like, what is that? And that leads me to a whole other place. So in my mind, those are some of the most important, at least from my experience, things that come about from the informed piece.
Right. And I think it's almost like that, to me, it's like that archetypal kind of Sherlock Holmes, like solving a mystery kind of thing. Like, you have these experiences that if you didn't try to find some context in some external,
sometimes it's hard to make a line from point A to point B. You're like, what is this? To see the connections.
You may not find some explanation of why you had that weird thing happen, or why you had that dream. And then when you get that context, that's where some of the wisdom part can really come into play. Because these experiences aren't always delivered with a very clear, and this is how you apply this to your life, or this is the wisdom of this. They can be really abstract and vague and, seemingly meaningless until you realize that other people have had these experiences and they've attributed this to this, or there's a pattern of this that happened. So I think it's really important to do that. I think the idea of unverified personal gnosis, to me, implies that you're figuring out that wisdom without any external input, and that just doesn't make any sense. We're in this world.
Well, sometimes we can be so stuck in our own head or our own stuff that we can't, you can't see the forest through the trees. So that's another reason why it's good to seek outside validation. Right. I mean, don't hang your hat on it completely, obviously. You have to have your own experiences, and it's just sometimes it's just like seeking advice from a friend. Sometimes having an objective or, somebody who's not involved in your situation specifically give you a little insight is very helpful.
Which can help separate the experiences that may be coming from your intellect more, or you're placing more significance on it, or the experiences that are just plain maybe a little bit, creative or superficial, versus stuff that's actually meaningful. You can kind of weed through stuff and figure out what, was that crow actually just a crow, or was it, so if somebody else says that, who works with the same deity, the Morrigan, says, I hear crows crow, which I did find out, I hear them crowing all the time in threes, and it's usually connected to when I'm trying to connect with her, or I've had an experience, so it's like, oh, okay, that is significant. It's not just a crow.
Right.
It's something I've noticed as a pattern.
And also, we're not self-contained, right? We are existing in a world, and there are all kinds of patterns and there are all kinds of connections, and, different people may have different beliefs on all of that, but it exists, right? We are together. We are a collective, right? Absolutely. And so it's not happening in a vacuum. So having that outside validation, because the outside, we are affected by, what I mean? It does play a part even in our own internal world to some extent.
Right. Yeah, it's a bit like one-sided and almost like a form of, this is a weird, I never thought I'd use this term, spiritual narcissism, to like just assume that you know better, or like you have, it's all there within you and that you don't need to look outside of yourself. Right. It's kind of a strange term because it's kind of hypocritical.
Well, and I do believe it's all within us. It is all in there, but that doesn't mean, the outside world is a reflection of what's within you anyway, right? Exactly, so like, there's no reason not to look out into the world around you, for whatever reason. It is not just for validation. I mean, maybe to be confronted on something and to have something to be like, okay, well, maybe my belief about this thing or my experience with this thing isn't what I thought it was because of something that I've discovered out in the world around me.
Yeah, it can be really clarifying to like to look outward. It's, again, like bringing it back to tarot, like I always will. Tarot as a mirror. People often get readings where they're like, oh, well, I already knew all that, but just hearing it in a different way or just having that mirrored back to them was validating and gave it more significance. So it's the same thing with verifying your mystical experiences or your personal gnosis. I did write down like a few different examples of how I do that, because I thought for people listening, they might not, they might be like, okay, well, how do you inform it? Like, what are the different ways you can inform it? So I thought, I don't know if you want to...
I didn't, but go ahead and, yeah.
I'm sure you'll have some thoughts for sure. To add to this, I wrote down checking mystical experiences against other religious traditions or, spiritual traditions, with a spiritual teacher or other practitioners. Obviously throughout history, there's been people who have written, lots of amazing spiritual texts like Hermes and things like that. You can compare those to what you read in terms of that. And also, like I said, historical facts, scientific facts, mythology. I wrote examples. Oh, no, that was an example I wanted to share. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. I don't know if there's anything else you want to...
No, I mean, I agree with you. I have... The internet is a wonderful resource. It can be a garbage pile, but, it can also be a wonderful resource. Yeah. I've done lots of searching on the internet on one topic that has brought in something totally unexpected that is completely validating to the first thing, books, obviously, friends, not just friends, but like spiritual. I've had different spiritual communities that I've been parts of and like getting validation through those experiences. And honestly, a lot of times it happens kind of on accident. I'm not wholeheartedly looking for it, but like it shows up and I'm like, oh,
TV show or something.
Yeah.
Or even something your child says, like,
it's just very synchronistic and you're like, random. Okay, I need to pay attention to this.
Random. Like if there's a tree you think that speaks to you and your child goes, oh, that tree, that tree's really funny, or that tree is, they say something that makes you realize the tree also spoke to them and you're like, oh, okay. And I think one thing I wrote at the end of my notes was, like, when in doubt, trust your gut. Like, if there's something external that goes against your mystical experience, always trust that first. If you need to kind of pick between where you take that guidance, take it from your intuition, take it from your internal conversations with your higher self or with, your guides, your gods and goddesses.
And don't expect everything to always fall into place immediately. It may take time.
Yeah. For sure.
Patience.
Oh, for sure. That's a really good point. Like, there's mystical experiences I had like years ago, and then like I'll be in a conversation with you and I'll be like, I have context.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I know you have too, because I've seen you and heard you go through that process too. So one of the amazing things about mystical experiences is that they're the gift that keeps giving. Like, you're going to keep learning. And that's why I think it's also important to keep a journal and write all this stuff down. If it feels significant, write it down.
Definitely. Okay. Well, I think we've talked for long enough about this. I will say that if you want to hear us talk more about this, you can head over to our Patreon and check out our different tiers and what's going on over there. And we just want to thank you for hanging out with us. And until next time, keep exploring.
Thanks, everybody.